Hey everyone, welcome to the next edition of our podcast. I think we are at episode 5. I think
So.
I may be miscounting. We have something a little bit unique for you today. Instead of choosing one topic and us going back and forth for a while, Patrick and I have selected some lightning round questions. These are questions that we've been curious to ask each other to get each other's opinion and thoughts on various topics. And so you get like a little bit of everything today. And please let us know if you find this interesting or if you prefer a deeper dive into one topic, but we figured we'd shake it up a little bit. So that's what we have for us today. Any opening remarks, Patrick, before we jump in?
Yes, just some. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, Rachel, and make you talk about it because I think you need to. Bella's not here to speak, so I'll just talk briefly for her. So last week she graduated Texas Tech with a 3.9. She's got a giant brain. She recently relocated back to Houston after being in West Texas for a couple years, so super proud of her for that. And then you are graduating next week from Harvard. Tell them what the degree is in.
My degree is a master's in industrial organizational psychology, which essentially is the social science behind HR.
And your GPA is what? Say it.
It's a 4.
One of the most humble human beings I've ever met. You should be so proud of that. Both of you. Bella 3.9, you 4.0. Those are brains I can't even conceive. So congratulations, ladies, to both of you. So Rachel, I think you're starting us off.
Yes. So the first question I have for you, Patrick, we dug into this a little bit last week, but I'd like to extend that conversation just a little bit. You achieved responsibility at levels way beyond your years. How did that feel? And looking back, what do you wish you knew?
That's super solid. That's a great question. If you go back to when I was 19 and in the military, I picked up a role that was beyond my years and rank, working for a Lieutenant Colonel, Mary Meyer, who listens to this podcast, and we're going to have her on as a guest, hopefully in the late summer. So Mary, if you're listening to this one, look for your email inviting you to come talk to us about leadership and your experiences. But it was a big responsibility. She had a lot of responsibility. She had 1,000, 1,500 troops working for her when we deployed to the Middle East. Battalion commander, female, in a world then that was still very much a male-dominated environment. But she carried so much respect and so much authority, and was a leader of leaders. Like I've never been around a human like that. She's very unique in many, many ways. And I was too young and too dumb and too all the things to comprehend the impact that she would have on me at the time and how important my role was keeping her safe in a very dangerous environment, because that was part of the role. And you get focused on the actual tasks at hand, whatever that was, getting her from A to B in the Middle East for meetings and troop visits and site positioning strategy routes and all the stuff that you do. That was like my first experience with being, call it, over promoted or promoted beyond my years. And then you jump to flying, and I made captain at 24, and you've got people behind you in a little tin can that you're zipping across the Northeast in thunderstorms or around storms or on beautiful days. I mean, flying is flying, good weather or bad weather. And I just loved it so much. I wasn't paying attention to the weight of the responsibility. And then in corporate America, I made VP 2 years in or 3 years into my career, which was wild. Some of it was the place where I worked. If you had the fortitude and the grit to move through it and you could be nimble and think quickly on your feet, they gave you more and more to do. So what I wish I would have known different or would have had some more awareness in is a double-edged sword, because I'm almost glad I didn't understand the responsibility because it gave me freedom to operate. But I wish I would have treated it with a little more respect and in the moment given it more thoughtfulness and more attention. That getting those types of roles is a privilege. and I didn't always treat it as such. And there were moments where I almost disrespected the job. I don't mean like in an ugly way, just I would only focus on the negative of the job. And I think that came from not knowing what I was doing. So it's easier to complain about something you don't understand, even though you're the one trying to understand it. It's like a huge head thing. So that's my answer.
Interesting. Throughout my career, people have
You
always
want
been
to
trying to.
unpack all that, don't you?
What? No, I'm thinking, and first of all, I think it's really cool to look back and just realize, right, what maybe you should have done differently. But I wonder, have you ever gone back to some of the people that you worked with, even Colonel Meyer, and shared some of your thoughts now about how you perceived yourself then? That could be really cool.
um, she has reached out numerous occasions with commentary about my current status. And we got to see each other. My family and I, after Berkeley, our daughter graduated high school, we took her and a couple of her girlfriends to Hawaii, and that's where Colonel Meyer lives, on the islands. And she flew over to meet us. Like, we have a very special bond, the two of us. We spent a lot of interesting days together. And I had said to her at the lunch table, really thanking her, but not going too deep into what I was at the time. She has a lot of hot sports opinions about what the 19-year-old is me, and she is not shy about sharing them. So I'm sure on the podcast she will share some of that, but we haven't gone like too deep. We've just commented on who I was then and who she sees me as now, which is fascinating to unpack some of that together.
That's really cool. I got a random message on LinkedIn a few years ago from somebody that I interacted with briefly, probably 15, 20 years ago. And that person just reached out and said, "Hey, I know it's been forever. I just wanted to tell you that you told me something way back then, and this is the impact it had." And I was like,
Wow.
whoa, I didn't even realize that. Right. So I think it's kind of cool when people are reflective, and it just reminds us of the impact that we have,
Yeah,
even.
those are gifts. When people make the time to do that, that's a gift, no doubt. Okay, it's my turn. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. How do you find joy when you're in a tough spot that won't brighten up soon? It's a version of grit, right? Or mental
Yes.
fortitude.
Yes. That's a big question. It's a big question because I think the answer is not one size fits all. And I think it depends on why there is that lack of joy, right? I think some situations are just awful, and some situations you just need to figure out how to get out of them if there's no joy in sight, right? And I think that sometimes you only know that by talking to somebody who's objective, who's a little bit removed from the situation, who can guide you. Because I truly think sometimes people put themselves through horrible things. And I'm talking about professional situations that we can control. And they think, well, this is just a rite of passage, or I'm paying my dues, or I have to do this even though I hate it. And sometimes that's really not true. Sometimes to find joy, you actually have to step out of that situation and find a different situation. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. I think other situations where things are really kind of sucky for a variety of reasons. Either you have to get through a really hard time, or there's a situation that will resolve itself, right? When there's an end in sight and you can see your path through it. I think what I do is two things. The first thing that I do, and this sounds a little maybe counterintuitive, but I always imagine if it was worse. And then I'm happy that it's not worse. So if something's really, really frustrating and bad, I'm like, okay, so this is what's not cool about it. And then I start imagining all the ways it can be worse. And I'm like, okay, but it's not that. So I can deal with it. I've got this. I also remind myself of situations in the past that were not ideal. And I remind myself about how I've gone through them and how when it was over, I was usually better for it, because when you overcome adversity, it helps with success. And probably that's another whole podcast episode. The third thing that I would say is when things really, really seem down and you're not finding joy in your work, and it doesn't feel great. Think about what you would do if you had more control or autonomy over the situation, right? And start a project plan of all the projects you wish you can do. And if you had more power over the situation, what kind of decisions would you make differently? And sometimes that feels great because even though it may not be possible now for a variety of reasons, you feel like you've created something productive. And then maybe one day when the time is right, you pull that project out of, that document. And you're like, ooh, now it's time we can implement this. Find joy in other places. One thing that I've been saying a lot recently, and apologies if you're listening to this and if you've heard me say this over and over, but I really believe that there's no part of anyone's life that is going to be the source of all joy. There are times when your family is not going to make you happy. There's going to be times when your job is going to be frustrating and annoying, and you're going to hate your boss and you're going to be annoyed at something. And so, if you have more than one thing going on in your life at any given point of time, if one part is not going well, you can rely on other aspects to bring you more joy. And it could be a hobby, it could be a book that you're reading, it could be a pottery class, it could be an exercise thing that you decide to pick up. It could be something really, really small, but figuring out a way to make sure that whatever's not bringing you joy is not completely taking over all of your emotional space and all of your time.
You helped see me that when I got here. You said that a lot. The
Did
first
I?
90 days of digging through, you'd say, Patrick, find your minutes of joy, focus on something. And that's almost kind of how this podcast came together. Like we enjoy doing this, right? It's a little bit of a diversion from the day to day, and everybody could do something like that. It doesn't need to be a podcast. I like how you put that. Whatever your personal hobbies are,
Yeah.
you have to make time for that. So, okay, I think it's my turn.
Oh, okay.
That's good.
I have a good one for you.
Yes, ma'am.
What's an example of a time when you've seen someone self sabotage their success? When you know that somebody's going down a path that is not good and you know that they may not know it. Tell us about it. What
Boy,
are you
there's so many.
thinking? What do you do? How do you respond? Do you interfere? Do you let it go?
I always interfere. I mean, I don't do it to be. If I see it, I will either forcibly or gently opine based on who I'm dealing with. Because you got to tailor how you communicate with people based on who they are and their personality. That's like one thing about leadership I try to tell people all the time is depending on who I'm talking to, I adjust now when we've covered this, right? But in my past, everything was one velocity, 0 to 100. That's it. Now I calibrate who I'm dealing with based on what they need. Like I've gotten better at meeting them where they are. But preventing someone from self sabotaging is touchy no matter who they are, what their personality's like, because I don't know, pride or whatever. And I'm sure you have some theory on this based on gender, socioeconomic backgrounds, race, creed, religion, whatever. Everyone's got things in their minds that make them who they are, believe what they believe. So how you approach is sensitive. But I have seen people who could have accomplished anything they wanted to accomplish in their careers, but for whatever reason held a belief system or were unable or unwilling to hear a counter view or a parallel view. It doesn't even have to be opposite of what they're thinking. It could just be a parallel. Hey, do you think about stepping over here just for a minute? And it's usually the people who aren't self-aware that end up driving themselves into the ditch the most. I've seen self-aware people do it too, but there's usually probably other things going on in their life that distract them from whatever they're trying to accomplish. But the people who are unaware of themselves or don't know how to handle understanding who and what they are will self-sabotage on behaviors. They can't read the room. They don't even know what that means. They don't know how to accept other people's commentary or thought processes or needs or wants. They are blind to what's going on around them, either outside their walls or outside their team. Because it could be a market thing, it could be an industry thing, it could be a company thing, it could be a team thing. If you're not, it's heavy. Like if you can't pay attention or absorb everything that's going on around you, you may not see that you're driving off a cliff professionally, personally. And that's why one of the episodes, or maybe it was just me and you talking, like the more people you can surround yourself that have the courage to speak truth to you, even though you are in a position of authority, like, and I don't mean by title, you could be a project owner of a very large project. and your title's project manager. Like, this isn't a C-suite discussion or a VP discussion. This is a authority discussion. And if you have authority over something or someone or some place, and you don't take all the inputs to make sure you can see clearly, I see that as a version of self-sabotage. I know I've seen CEOs who remain nameless, who they are surrounded with people that just do this. I consider that self-sabotage by that CEO, because he's either, he or she is unwilling or unaware or whatever to listen. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do what everyone's telling you. It just means everything should be like multiple inputs to make a decision. And you'd make the best decision you can with what you have. And then you own it later. That's a version of self-sabotage. And then I'll stop is you make the call, you make a mistake, and then you blame other people for it, or you won't take responsibility yourself. People have reacted in really unique ways to me over the years when I just in front of a room full of people say, I own that. I did that. I made that call. You didn't. It didn't go well. Let's just keep moving. I got it. Don't worry about it. Now, everyone's going to react differently to that, but I always respect people more that say, you know what, that was such a mistake by me. So I consider self-sabotaging also not owning your mistakes. So not listening and not owning or taking responsibility to air cover your people that are executing your ask. And if it goes wrong, just own it. So I've seen that a couple times in my career.
That's really interesting. I learned about a psychological phenomenon called the Kruger-Dunning Effect or Dunning-Kruger Effect. And these were two researchers that studied the phenomenon of when people who are incompetent in a particular area overestimate their understanding or their knowledge of that particular topic.
What's it called?
So it's called the Kruger-Dunning Effect. So they're almost not smart. By definition, they're not smart enough to realize that they're not smart enough. So if you Google it or you even search on Twitter about it, it's kind of funny to see some examples, but it's a real thing where you almost don't know what you don't know.
That sounds similar to another one where you rise to your own level of incompetence.
Ooh,
have you heard that one?
That is. No, but I guess that's kind of similar.
I'm gonna find it, and I'm gonna ask you your next one. I'm gonna listen, but remember, this is really for the audience, right? But I'm gonna go look for it while you're answering my next one.
But one more thing as a follow-up to what you just said, almost like an antidote to that question. One thing that I've seen that's a really cool behavior in a leader is they'll share an idea and they'll say, okay, now I need you to poke holes in it. Right? So they actually give people permission to disagree with them. Yeah, which is, it's kind of a cool exercise, and it's a way to show them like it's okay to speak truth to power.
You probably said that better, but in the last couple of years, I started saying, it's okay to tell me I'm wrong.
Yes.
Like I'd say that because they're like, oh, Patrick said it, so we have to do it. No, like I act like that because I'm so passionate or enthusiastic about the mission that people are like, oh, he sounds so confident, we should just go. But so I have to say, you can tell me I'm wrong. I would like to think people take me up on it, but that's a good call out. You ready for your next one?
I am.
All right. I love this one. I'm jealous you're going to get to answer this one. What is most critical to say and do to prepare people and environments for big change?
Oh, that is such a good one. That's probably a whole topic. Here's the thing. If anyone is interested in more on this topic, please let us know in the comments, or you can message us directly. And there's a lot here, and there's so much research, and there's so many consultants and Harvard Business Review articles and books written on how to manage change and the different stages of change. And I think change is scary to almost everyone, I think in different degrees. And then, of course, people react differently. Personally, for me, I find change really fun. When things stay the same, I get bored. And so obviously sometimes when change is dramatic, it can be rattling and I need to adjust just like everyone else. But the concept of change is like exciting to me. For some people, the concept of change is really scary because once they get comfortable and secure and in some sort of routine, then they really would rather not anything change. And it's almost annoying or frustrating. So I think the first thing is to figure out, based on who you're dealing with, is how are they reacting to the concept of change in general? Is this change very new to them, or have they experienced a lot of change and this is just another change, right? So if that's the case, they may be accustomed to it, but they may have change fatigue. They might be like, okay, another one. Or on the other hand, if they haven't experienced change for a really, really long time, if something that has stayed the same for decades, and then all of a sudden you're changing things on them, it could be really jarring. So I think first to figure out, what are you walking into? How scary is this going to be? How dramatic is the change objectively? Is it a very, very big change, or is it really small that people are making a big deal about? So I would first figure that piece out. And then the next part is, and this you'll read in every article and thought leadership piece about change, you got to tell people it's coming. So no matter how comfortable you are with change, no matter how scary the change is going to be, people will freak out if it's a surprise. I love change, but I actually hate surprises. So if there's something happening, I want to know about it. And then if I know about it, I'll plan for it and, make any necessary arrangements. And so for as much notice as possible, just let people know it's coming. And if you don't have all the information, tell them that. Say, hey, big changes ahead. We know this is going to be scary. Acknowledge that it's going to be uncomfortable for people. Tell them what you're going to do to help them adjust. There will be training. It will be gradual. We will roll out this change slowly. We will have a Q&A session for people who are unsure. You will have an opportunity to get a mentor or an advisor, or maybe there's like an exit ramp for somebody who just doesn't want to participate in whatever the new change is. So I think letting them know in advance as early as possible, and then also letting them know that you understand that it's scary, is helpful. And then the final piece is, if you don't know something about the change, be honest about it. If you're not sure, if part of the change is still a question mark, I think let people know. For some people, they'll find that even more uneasy, but I think it's worse when people feel like, oh, so you're telling us this whole story, and then actually, it's really going to be different. So if you're really not sure, or you want input from people, be upfront about it, and then have the supports in place to anticipate that everyone's going to handle it differently. And then finally, again, I alluded to this slightly before, but if somebody is just totally not up for the change, and it is possible to opt out, whether it's, finding a different job, it may end up coming to that. And I think they have, I say all the time, you got a choice or you got a chance, right? So if somebody's like, you know what, all this change is awesome for all of you, but I'm just really not into it. Well, maybe it's time for a conversation. And again, that can be driven by the person who's experiencing the change.
Several of my HR partners from my past, Rachel, you've met two of them, right?
Yes.
Have received complaints from people that were in my org, because I would say, look, life is short. If you're not happy, go. Not everyone wants change. Not everyone wants what's happening, and that's okay. Life is free agency. You do have a choice. No one forces you into your employer's atmosphere. So they would because all HR always attend my staff meetings. I've always been a really tight HR partner, back to US Bank kind of leader. And so they got used to some staff meetings. They'd know they'd get emails afterwards saying, why does Patrick tell us to quit if we're not happy?
But I think that's fine, because as long as you give people enough notice, right? You don't say, if you don't adapt to this change tomorrow, like, you should leave. Like, that is not cool. Right. But if you give people
I
notice,
never said that. But
and then if they decide, like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot, like, even if it's going to be hard, then they're acknowledging that they made a choice, and it's not just something that happened to them.
I love people that try.
Right.
I don't think everybody should be an expert or be perfect at what they do. Just keep trying. I tell people that all the time. Just try.
Yeah. And the part of change that's most jarring to people, I think, is when they feel like it's happening to them and they're just being controlled by all this change. And so if you have some sense of agency, it makes it easier.
Well said. And the people listening that are in a position of receiving the change, ask questions.
Yes.
Like, listen to what Rachel just said. We're talking to leaders, but I like to say everyone's a leader. You can be a single contributor and be a leader of a company. Like, leaders aren't managers. Leaders are somebody who can sway the belief system of an organization to accomplish things together. So all of you listening to this, if you're in a position to receive change from a boss and the boss isn't being as clear as you need them to be, don't do it in public, but pull them aside or ask for time. And say, hey, I just have some questions because I want to get this right. I want to be part of the solution. Bosses love that stuff. Leaders love that stuff. So be inquisitive, be curious. All right, so I found it while you were talking before you asked me the next one, the Peter principle.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay.
I'm gonna read it. All right. And
Please.
then maybe Bella can put it in because it's actually a book from 1969, which I forgot it was a book. So the Peter Principle is a concept in management developed by Lawrence J. Peter, which observes that people in a hierarchy, so military, first responders, corporate America, not for profits, hierarchy, tend to rise to a level of respective incompetence. Employees are promoted based on their success in the previous jobs until they reach a level at which they are no longer competent, as skills in one job do not necessarily translate to another. And when you were
Ooh.
describing the Kruger Dunning effect, it just reminded me of, it's not the same. I'm just saying it reminded me of the Peter principle. So anyway, maybe Bella can find it and put it in our speaking notes for the next episode.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Okay, ready for the next one?
Sure.
Okay, this one is a juicy one. What do people consider the most difficult aspect of working for you? And then what is the best aspect that makes it all worth it?
Look how happy she is to ask me that. There's all kinds of subliminal messaging going on here.
Hey, we're
Um,
all we're all a mixed bag, all of us, right?
okay, so there's so many. And I'll answer it from the totality, not in the segments I've been breaking down. Because the first 10 year me in corporate America is not the last 16, right? Different.
Yeah.
But
No, we want to
over
know
the
now. We want to know now.
but yeah, now, but over the totality, there's been a theme that my passion runneth over. And that confuses some audiences. Like there's an SNL skit that's just completely hilarious. I think Tom Hanks was in it, and it was uh, a bit on being hypo. Like you feed the dude sugar. It was an adult, but he was playing a child, or maybe it was Mike Myers. I guess it doesn't matter, but he just couldn't be restrained. Like no matter what you did, he just wanted to go 192 miles an hour on everything. I, I, I can get a lot done with people because through sheer will and enthusiasm, like I make chewing gum and walking entertaining from how I talk, the things I come up, the things I say. There's been some people in these chats in some of these areas where this podcast is. It says, Patrick, you're much more entertaining than you're showing up on this podcast. I do say some pretty wild things sometimes to prove points, make points, help people remember. But I really think that if we're going to spend this much time together, it should be for a reason. Like my favorite person in the universe is my wife. And I have spent what feels like sometimes way more time at work than I have with her. And I know we're going to have another episode on just that work-life balance. I call it work-life freedom because I think you should have the freedom to choose. And you've helped me with that a lot, Rachel, by the way. But that energy I bring to a task, even if it's adding an ATM somewhere or implementing a debit card program over my career or helping integrate First Data into Fiserv or what we're doing here at Checkalt with Project Fortitude and stabilizing the environment and taking paper out of the check system and These are things that some people would like cross their eyes at and say, what? I find all those things really entertaining. Like I have a natural curiosity for doing things that other people can't or won't. So I try to spray some esprit de corps and some energy into doing things that some people would say, why is that important? Because I think work is important. I think if we're going to spend all this time doing these things, when we're done with our days, either our career days or our life days, we should look back and say, wow, that was good. Maybe it shouldn't be the most important thing in our lives, work, but it should be way up there. And particularly for leaders, we're helping people pay their mortgages, their rent, sending their kids to college. Like we're developing environments that are meant to sustain life and do freedom things for folks, like give them the freedom to go to baseball games or take a vacation with their family or do something special for somebody. So that enthusiasm, although confusing in some environments, because they're like, why is this so important? It creates a lot of progress. And I like to fix things. Like I want to be part of a culture and I want to be part of an environment And I want to be around people that want to do more than what they think they're capable of. I was told for a lot of years that I wasn't this or wasn't that. My mom was always my biggest fan. And then, look, this is not a woe is me thing. Like, I was a wild child. So lots of people drew a story in their head of what I would look like later. And my mom would say, you can harness that wildness, if you will, into something really positive. And I try to do that through leadership and motivating people in unique ways, whether it's crazy commentary on a staff meeting or humor or ultra transparency, so people really know that they're part of something bigger than they are. I think a lot of people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to be proud of something. So I try to create environments that do that. And that's hard because it creates a level of expectation that a lot of people are like, I don't know if I can do that. That's a lot, Patrick. And it creates some turbulence sometimes because, and you've seen it here, Rachel, where people don't want to let me down because I create an environment of pride. Oh, I don't want to let Patrick down. When in fact, I really don't want to let our customers down. I don't want them to let themselves down. And there's confusion in that because a lot of people are like, I don't want to let him down. Don't let yourself down is the real message. You can do all these great things. Do them. Be bold. Don't do conventional wisdom things. Swim upstream. So I'm answering it in an interesting way, but I am answering it like sometimes you can be so engaging, you create an environment where people don't want to fail because they're afraid of disappointing you. When in fact, and tried to get better at it over the years, I'm trying to push them to be the best version of themselves. The more people that can be the best version of themselves, the more successful the team can be, the more successful the business can be. But I wasn't always great at communicating really what that was. So there's pluses and minuses to working for high energy people. I hope I answered it.
Well, I think it's
and you
awesome.
can feel free to opine because you're watching it happen in real time, right? As my partner in this.
Well, if you're up for it, checkalt.com/careers. Sorry, I had to throw that in.
That was not an advertisement. I was just a discussion on leadership. I promise.
I know. It's awesome. It's awesome.
But
What's
it
next?
is why I have a following. Like a lot of people
Yeah.
followed me here. A lot of more people are asking me because they get that. And a lot of leaders don't put the time into that. They're focused on the spreadsheet. They're focused on whatever the next shiny object is. When in fact, our people are the killer app. Like a lot of industries aren't going to do the next iPhone. But if you lead people in a way that they are the killer app, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. You could be making tires, producing digital imaging, television, military operations, not-for-profits. You get people swaying together the right way and tapping their foot to the music with tempo, you can win anything.
Oh, yeah. And if you know that it's mission driven and you're focused for the right reasons, and also it's predictable, right? So people know you, they know what they're signing up for when they come to work with you, which is very different than other leaders who might be super duper unpredictable, right? You never know what you're going to get, right? And that can be very disjointing for some others.
Yeah, look, and you know what? On the last piece, and then I'm going to ask you a question, is sometimes transparency and velocity of communication is off-putting for people. They're not used to hearing that level of authenticness and truth because a lot of people make up words and fancy sentences because they saw it on a TV show or wherever they went to school told them that's how they should be instead of just being who they are. Like I am what I am. No one has to guess that. And you can like it or not, but what you see is what you get. And I'll never confuse someone with how I communicate. And they're always going to know where they stand, whether they like it or not. And people like that. To your point, they want to know.
Yeah, it's refreshing.
And it should be consistent, like you said. Mm-hmm. All right, you ready?
Yes.
How do you elevate those around you who are not asking or receiving credit for contributions as they deserve?
Oh, this is such a good one.
That is a wonderful one because a lot of people struggle with that.
They do. And do you know that in the Obama White House, this was covered in an article in the New York Times, and Bella's going to post this in the show notes because it's a great read. In the Obama White House, many of the women who worked in the administration in different, staff positions found that their voices were not being heard in meetings. So this is a phenomenon that's studied often, where one person will mention an idea, and then everyone will just sort of slide over it, and then a few minutes later somebody else will mention it, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And you might be thinking, hey, I just said that 2 seconds ago, right? And so some of the women in the Obama White House decided that they were going to amplify each other. So if that ever happened, they all agreed together, if that ever happened, then somebody would say, hey, you know what? Susie just said something. Can we give her a chance to explain? Or I think she mentioned that a few minutes ago. Why don't we listen to her, perspective on that topic? And what happened is important voices did not get lost in the shuffle. So very often it's important for everyone to make sure that we're all listening for nuggets of wisdom that might come, and we're not just paying attention to the loudest voices, the most outgoing personalities, or the biggest egos, because sometimes those are the people that get the most airtime in meetings and in conversations at work. Somebody that I admire greatly and who I consider a friend is Kieran Snyder, who is the CEO emeritus of a company called Textio, which is an AI company that actually invented ChatGPT before ChatGPT was a thing.
Oh, that's cool.
She is a linguist. She has a PhD in linguistics. She was a software developer and managed technical teams at Amazon and Seattle, and started a company that actually uses this AI technology to detect bias in job descriptions and in performance reviews to make sure that they would be compelling and attractive to people of all identities and demographics.
How'd you meet her?
How did I hear it?
How'd you meet her?
Oh, so I met her because I saw an article about the company and I reached out to her, and I think I was one of the first customers.
Oh, that's great. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
Fascinating. So Kieran, actually, she and her team invented there was a product called Textio Flow, where actually it was a blank screen. And what she knows is that there's tremendous writer's block, and people get really daunted by a blank sheet of paper, whether it's physical or digital. And you were actually able to start typing, and then the system would generate text. So it was before ChatGPT was a thing. Anyway, I bring this up because Kieran has done a lot of research about how people's communication patterns might be more effective or less effective. And just recently, she published an article where she analyzed a ton of data on meetings, and she tried to determine who tends to interrupt more during meetings, whose voices get heard. Is this phenomenon specific to men interrupting women, as many people think? And it turns out,
like I just did you.
So it turns out it's not actually the case. And everyone interrupts. I'm a terrible interrupter. But the reason why I bring it up is because the phenomenon is really interesting. And I think it's important not only for the person running the meeting to say, okay, we need to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak, because that's not always how life works. But if you're just a regular person and you're sitting in a meeting and somebody next to you may be a little bit more introverted, and you know how you see somebody sometimes trying to jump in? Sometimes on Zoom, you'll see it when they unmute and then they mute, or they unmute and then they mute. It's totally okay as a member of the meeting to say, hey, you know what? It looks like Joe is trying to say something, or message them and say, hey, it looks like you might have something to add. Do you want me to create an opening for you? And so having that kind of support as a peer in meetings and creating the space for someone else who might have something really important to say can be really helpful. So I think that's what you do in the moment when something like that happens. I think if you're in charge of a meeting, it's really important to recognize that people have different communication styles, different ways of processing information. Not everyone is neurotypical, right? Some people need to process the information visually. Some people need the information in advance. And so even figuring out how people tend to communicate and participate will make sure that you're not missing out on great ideas and only listening to the loudest voices in the room.
I love that.
Okay, final question, Patrick. What is the best advice you've given and the best advice you've received?
I'll start with what I received.
Okay.
And my mother told me this. So the best advice I received from my mom. My mom is a great influence on me. She said, never believe what's on your business card.
Ooh.
And I was young when she said it.
Now nobody has business cards anymore.
I know,
so you have to update that. Never believe what's on your LinkedIn profile.
Okay, never believe what's on your LinkedIn profile. But I was young, and I'm like, business card. And it was before I left for the military. Like, she was like, Treat everyone with respect that's earned that respect. It was super interesting and very intense for a young person to hear. And then I go off, and then I transition up over to corporate America. And I did see people, I still see people that act differently based on what they think they are versus what they are. And that is very off-putting. If you're going to build a culture of influence, like, and this could be a whole other topic, and you're the pro at this, right? But like, influencers own the world, right? If you can influence a group of people, if you can influence a person, if you can influence a customer, like, those people are unique to have in your organization because they gain followers and they gain team. People who elevate themselves mentally and emotionally based on what their title is or what their responsibility is lose folks. Another military connection is I was a military policeman, and we were kids in patrol cars, right? Like, I quickly transitioned over to more field work and core work, more stuff that you'd think the military does. But I did some law enforcement for a little while when I first got in, and you'd pull over colonels and generals, and the line was, don't confuse your rank with my authority, because my authority supersedes your rank. And I was just a kid pulling over 1-stars, colonels, majors, captains, whatever. And it's intimidating a little bit, right? The officers or the people you were pulling over that treated you with respect, you wanted to know those guys. The people who said, who do you think you are? I'm Colonel so-and-so. Like, some people would act like that. That's not commanding respect or earning respect, right? Corporate America has a version of that. Like, there's a lot of voices in corporate America that should be heard. Just because they don't have a title doesn't mean you shouldn't hear them. And that business card comment that my mom made transcends almost all the things I've seen and all the things I've tried to do. Now, look, this is coming from a person who's known for having a somewhat healthy disrespect for authority. Like, I've tried to manage that a lot. And that's funny, right? Considering someone who was very low ranking in the military, I got lucky with my commanders. Like, and I'll say some of the names, like Annette Teresi, Jeff Blackshaw, Mary Meyer, John Garrity. These were legends that went on in their careers. Dennis Fangman, Forrest Guest. These are people that most folks listening don't. Who is that? These are people who just commanded respect because they gave what they wanted back. And they listened. No one was taking my advice on combat operations in southern Iraq. I knew I had a voice if I needed it. And corporate America should be the same way. So that advice everyone should heed. Treat everyone with respect and dignity until they just absolutely proven that they don't deserve it. But create an environment where respect goes both ways. So that was one part of it. Like, what's the best advice I received? What's the best advice I've ever given? I stole it. I don't remember where I got it from, but it was be bold, be brief, and be gone.
Oh, that's great.
I can't remember where I saw it, but I loved it. And so in relation to when you're dialoguing with executives or executives at a client site or vendor executives and it's not executives. It could be for like anybody. It could be peer groups. It could be down in. It could be up the chain of command. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, be confident in what you're saying and don't use a bunch of happy talk. Get to the point and then go execute. The world is filled with people who can run their mouth. The world is not filled with people who can take vapor, like words or vapor, or, oh, I have a vision. Okay. I mean, the people that can take the vision and the vapor and make it a solid and can deliver what you say. Like, my stepdad has a thing that's been around forever. Like, he worked for Boeing in the 60s, and the CEO of Boeing, I can't remember his name. People can go look it up later. But on the back of his business card, it said, talk is cheap, takes money to buy whiskey. And my stepdad kind of took that, right? Like, because he worked for that guy. And he loved it. And he taught us, he taught my brother that, he taught me that, taught my sister that. It's like a family thing. Like, my license plate says, takes money to buy whiskey on my car. Like, it is deep in our bones that you just don't run your mouth. If you're going to run your mouth, you got to back it up. If you can't back it up, don't run your mouth. Those are key lessons. Like that's the be bold, be brief, be gone. Talk is cheap, takes money to buy whiskey. Don't be the guy that pours or the lady that pours. Don't just, because no one wants to work with anybody like that. Execute what you say.
I love that so much. I think we need to do a podcast on that whole,
Talk is cheap.
no, on the whole interacting with hierarchy. I've always, in my life, and I think some of my teachers when I was a child probably, still have regrets that I was in their class. I just never thought that people were like a different level of human because they had a higher title. Like everyone puts their pants on the same way.
They do.
You should treat everyone with the same respect. Just because somebody has a different title, that doesn't mean they can do bad things or control you in other ways. And, I can share some stories. You and I have talked about the work that I've done with transitioning military, but I found myself, speaking with really important generals and admirals in the Pentagon, talking about what the U.S. military needed to do differently to prepare their transitioning service members for career paths in corporate America. And I was just some, random HR person, right? And people were like, how are you just telling them what to do? And I'm like, well, this is really important work, right? They need to help and support.
Because you're bold. Folks. You're bold.
Bold. Yeah, but also, again, they're people. Just because they're some important general, they're people. Everyone puts their pants on the same way. But I think on the other side of the coin, what we need to remember is people who hold those titles and are perceived differently need to recognize the impact of their hierarchy. Like, for example, as a head of HR, what I've learned is I cannot just message an employee and say, hey, do you have a few minutes? People freak out when I do that. They do, because they're like, the head of HR is asking me if I have a few minutes. And what I realized is I need to tell people, hey, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk to you about medical benefits or something, right? So I think sometimes, people in positions of authority need to recognize, right, how others might perceive them.
How you're being there, what it does to the atmosphere. Yes. Because in their mind, the head of HR is, that's the head of HR, probably going to get fired. Like, it sucks that people think that right away, but you're actually there 9 times out of 10 to do the exact opposite. You're a grower of people. You're a grower of culture. So to your point, but you're very grounded and aware of who and what you are. Back to what I was saying about the advice thing and don't believe what's on your business card. A lot of people receive the mantle of authority in whatever role, and they think that's almost a license to behave differently than what they should be, and they forget where they came from. That's your general and admiral thing, the CEO thing.
Yes. Okay, we're going to have another whole podcast on that topic because
probably we should.
There's some really juicy stuff there. But let's talk about what's up next. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I found it really fun. Patrick, thank you so much for sharing.
I loved it. Yeah.
So what we're going to do next is we're going to have a conversation about how we build and maintain boundaries between our personal and work lives. So Patrick mentioned work-life freedom versus work-life balance. I think some people like to use the word integration, but as boundaries become more fluid, right, with technology, with remote work, with travel, I think that goes in both directions. And I think also depending on the type of job, depending on the circumstances at your job, and depending on what's going on in your personal life and your family and whatever, right, these boundaries need to evolve. So we're going to share, we're going to talk about what we've done, both, what has worked and what has not worked, what we've learned over the years, and how that's changed over time for us.
And one of us is better at this than the other. And you could probably select.
I don't know.
We will both share. And are we going to have the special guest come talk about what it's like?
We might have a special guest, so stay tuned.
I'm excited about that. I have questions for him.
Ooh, okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day.
Take care, all.